Hey everyone, I'm going to look at a limit hold'em hand history today that was sent to me by a friend who plays mid-high stakes live poker in LA. And it kind of shows me sometimes how live poker players that don't, um, particularly spend time using solvers, this maybe resembles some of you that are watching this video, maybe where they get some concepts right intuitively and where they get some concepts wrong intuitively. So I thought that this would be an interesting hand to go over. The way the hand played out, my friend opened sixes in the hijack, got 3-bet by a button that he described as an aggressive regular, so sort of decent pre-flop, but like maybe a little too over aggro post-flop, and he called with his sixes. It came king 10-4 rainbow. We see villains, our hero starts out with a check, and villain gets to c-bet 95% on this board. Remember that my sims do have a capped range for the out-of-position player here, so we can see that he's not supposed to have aces, kings, or ace-king in this situation. Obviously, I think I did a video previously where I showed capped versus uncapped ranges in this spot, and it would change things a little bit. So, to always take these with a grain of salt. But this is how I play in these spots, and I do think that it's worth like kind of studying the standard instead of going with an exploit sim. Anyway, villain bets, and we can see that we immediately have kind of a complicated strategy for out of position on a king 10-4 board. We do have to give up immediately with like 20% of our range. Mostly just coming from like ace X that doesn't really have much going on, and then these like kind of middling suited connectors that don't have a flush draw or a backdoor flush draw. Actually, even the backdoor flush draw hands, most of them seem to be folding. You have to have a little bit more strength than just like naked random cards and a backdoor flush draw to continue on this board texture. It looks like it has to be like pretty well connected to hand, like maybe 8-7, and then even then it's 0 EV, so it's starting to turn some of these into bluff raises. We can see that my friend's hand sixes could actually consider going for like what's kind of a mergy raise on the flop, which ends up being like protecting its equity kind of a play. You're really not getting any better hands to fold immediately, but you have kind of a surprising hand, and if you can get 2 overcards to fold, that's a good result. We can see that the standard play is to call here, and that's what he did. Turn offsuit king, and we check pretty much range, and now we get to see villain bets again 89% of the time. So one thing that stuck out to me about this hand is that my friend described the button as a very aggressive player, maybe overdoing it post-flop with double barrels. But we can see on this sort of texture, this is just good poker. For the most part, villain just keep blasting on a board that really favors their range. Notice, I did this in another video recently with some ace-x wheel combos. Notice all these ace wheels blasting off here. Villain's range is relatively condensed in a 3-bet pot, so they don't really have a lot of nothing on this board. The only real other bluffs that villain should have here are hands like Jack-9 suited, gut shot draws. So villain is finding bluffs from all these ace-x suiteds that basically have nothing. And these are going to triple off on a lot of runouts. So villain bets again, and we can again see now that Hero's range is now getting kind of capped because he didn't necessarily slow play much on the flop. Obviously, we do have some King X that now has trips and is feeling pretty good about his hand. We even see that the King is such a good turn that Hero is considering going for value with some Queen 10 type of hands for second pair. But for the most part, we're starting to get kind of passive here, and just have to be very defensive minded and then give up with a bunch of gut shots, even more ace highs that were continuing that had the backdoor flush draws. At this point, we're basically continuing with pairs and let's see, small pairs are so the weakest part and open enders, right? So Queen Jack is basically the only non-paired hand that we have at this point. Hero calls again, and the river comes a queen, and this is kind of the crux of the hand to me. As I said, my friend decided to donk this river, and you can sort of understand the thought process here, right? The idea here is it kind of looks like Hero has ace queen or ace jack, and we can see that the solver doesn't totally hate this strategy. Ace queen and ace jack are indeed the combos that are throwing in a little bit of a donk here if you allow, if you ever see one. And the difference in EV between bet and check is basically 0, so it's fine to consider doing that. However, with such a range disadvantage on this board texture, the solver prefers to play defensively. And notice that we also have a reduced number of combos of ace-queen because some of those were 4-bet pre-flop. So, in theory, we're mostly just supposed to check on this card. And now we can see that villain can basically go for value with many, many hands here, tripling off 70% of the time here. A lot of the semi-bluffs that villain would have had on the turn have now gotten there. Obviously, Queen Jack is now a pair. Jack-9 suited even that we mentioned earlier has made the straight. So villain has very few bluffs left over. And in fact, bluffing hands as strong as Ace-9 off And then we can see some of these ace X wheel hands that don't interact with anything, right? So ace 3 suited is just tripling off, ace 2 suited tripling off. Some of these other ace X are even finding bluffs because he needs more bluffs because villain at this point has too much value. The only hand that villain's interestingly checking, it was a little surprising to me that Jack 10 would prefer to check on this card. It appears that some 10x is getting a little bit too thin here, and villain wants to have a better kicker, wants to have the ace 10. So a little bit interesting, and then we can just take a quick look at how villain's supposed to play his sixes, and we can see it's a 0 EV combo at this point, as are all of his pocket pairs, which this makes sense, right? Because we already said that villain is basically betting a 10 and better for value. So villain's strategy is well targeted to make all these small pairs indifferent. So we want these hands to have a tough decision, which means that all our value hands beat these, and we should have some bluffs. And kind of an interesting thing that happens here is that hero basically has no value combos outside of ace jack, but this still represents a sizable chunk of hero's range. And the hand that the solver wants to turn into a bluff raise is these ace 4 suited combos that got to the river this way. So this sort of makes sense, right? We have a small pair, doesn't seem like it can beat any value, and we do have that key ace, which blocks the straight itself. It blocks some of villains like super premium hands like ace king, ace ace, and so we do throw in the bluff raise every now and then to get the fold from a hand like ace 10. Queen 10 is basically pure folding. And we're also just saving the pot from the times. Oh, Queen 9 also pure folding. So we're getting a decent number of folds. Look at even King 9 is indifferent at this point. So the ranges shrivel up really fast to a river check raise bluff, where our range is basically a straight or a bluff. Yeah, kind of an interesting situation there. One other thing I want to point out before I forget about the donk is that if we look at how the in-position player should respond to a river donk, which again is not really a thing, we notice that the problem with donking sixes in Theoryland is that villain is basically calling every better hand and folding every worse hand. So this is usually not how you want to structure your range, because sixes just really serve no purpose betting in this way in Solverland, right? I mean, look at your villains. Fives are basically indifferent. Sixes have a tiny bit of EV, and then sevens are pure calling. So we also get bluff raised sometimes. The in-position player can now take some of these ace X wheel hands and turn them into bluff raises, considering they have all these value combos that we simply can't have, all of these full houses. Even aces is going for some thin value here, and all the ace jack combos. So villain, having still a sizable nut advantage on the river, is able to leverage that into plenty of bluff raises, which should really hurt the profitability of our sixes. And we can see that, not that they would ever arrive here at the river, but calling would be minus EV with sixes at this point, so, which makes sense. So yeah, kind of an interesting hand where my friend took an unorthodox line on the river. By the way, he did get the fold, and I do think that that is something that live players can be particularly strong at, is recognizing when their opponents are going to be unbalanced in these spots. If villain is folding some of these better combos like 9s, 8s, 7s, and possibly even a hand as strong as 10x, then even though in Theoryland this bluff is a mistake in a GTO solution, it can be very profitable if villain is not going to respond appropriately. So it's important to study these hands from both sides so that you can see how to avoid being exploited yourself, and where maybe your exploits can come from when you notice an imbalance in your opponent's play. Let me know what you think about this hand. I thought it was kind of an interesting one to run through in a nice 3-bet pot with kind of a weird combo, and I thought it'd be worth some analysis today. So I will see you guys in the comments, and let me know what you think. Talk to you soon.